So we're moving on to the next section of this exam, which is to implement and manage storage. Now, hopefully, most of you watching this have created many storage accounts in your career. And so walking you through the creation of a storage account might seem a bit basic. Now, you see here, Azure recently changed the user interface for creating storage accounts. And it actually is very similar now to creating a virtual machine as well. But there's a whole new, fresh user interface for creating a storage account. So why don't we just, for the sake of it, for fun, why don't we create a brand new storage account? So I went into the add resource. I chose storage account. You'll see here that you choose your subscription, you choose your resource group. I'm fine with the selection that is chosen, but you can also create a new resource group. You got to give your storage account a name. So AZSG new storage. And of course, choose one of the 50+ locations that you can store this in. I'm going to choose South Central US just to be all wild and crazy. Now, it's we're starting to get into now how we make some of these decisions. The standard versus premium storage account, it hasn't changed too much from the days when we were first learning this. The standard storage account is the physical spinning disk, the magnetic storage, the hard disk that we used to know and love, and the premium storage is the solid state disk, and it's a lot faster. You'll see here when I chose standard, I can choose different access tiers, hot and cold. We'll just talk about in a second. Switching over to premium, then it's a much limited amount of features, right? So it doesn't have the hot and cool, and it doesn't. It's only for page blobs, block blobs, pen blobs, file shares, tables, and queues will not be available. So you'll see just by choosing the premium storage account, I've reduced the types of things I can do with my storage account. Okay, I'm going to check with standard. Now, over the years, it used to just be general purpose and blob storage. Microsoft has introduced this storage v2 storage, which is the new default here. Again, general purpose storage. The general purpose storage is for all the file types, the blobs, the files, the tables, the queues. If we were just to go with a blob storage account, the big advantage of a blob storage account is that it can be public. So we can now turn this on and public on, and we can start to store files in Azure that we can then share with our websites. We can, put our images and videos in this blob account, and that's basically publicly accessible. That's really the big benefit of a blob storage account. The replication, I've been noticing that Azure's been removing the zone redundant storage. So you'll see it in some places, and then you won't see it in some places. So we've got the choice of locally redundant storage, which stores your data plus 2 additional copies within the region. And so this, to me, it takes advantage of the availability zones, which we haven't talked about much yet. But the availability zones, which allow us to create virtual machines in specific data centers. Globally redundant storage does that, plus 3 additional copies in other regions of the world. We'll just leave that for locally redundant storage. The access tier is something that's been added in the last couple of years. The basic premise is that hot storage is immediately available. So if you store something in the account, it should have the lowest latency time in terms of retrieving that back to you. When you go into a cool storage situation, it's actually cheaper to store that long term. If you're looking at the price per gigabyte over time, a cool storage is cheaper than a hot storage, but a cool storage introduces latency in the retrieval and expense. So basically, if you've got data that you shouldn't need to access frequently, but you still need to store it, like archival data, backup data, stuff that's purely for governance purposes or for legal requirements, you can store that in cool data and save some money. But when you do need to retrieve it, then it's going to cost you a little bit more. So basically, it's the infrequent data versus the frequent data. Now, going on to the next screen, We can force HTTPS access, which is enabled by default here. There's no really reason to turn this off unless you have specific applications that do not handle SSL, but most of the time you should have this turned on. Now this access from virtual networks, this is a requirement of the exam. So the exam says configure network access to the storage account. And so this is where we're going to be sort of focusing to start in terms of new knowledge. Now this is also called virtual network service endpoints in other places. By default, when you create a storage account, it's just generally accessible. You're going to get a URL. It's publicly accessible URL. And as long as you have the access keys you can be able to connect to that storage account and then read and write and things like that. You can use secure access signatures in order to give limited access to people, etc. But if we were to restrict access to this storage account to only specific virtual network, now I don't have one, but we could obviously create a virtual network, then this is going to turn off public access. So even if you have my access keys, if you're outside of this particular virtual network, then you're not going to be able to access the contents of this storage account. So this is a security feature. It's a lot more secure than leaving it open, okay? Now you would be able to use the network security groups to secure the network if you need VNet peering or global VNet peering. So you can arrange for your various applications to connect to your storage account, even if it's restricted to a single virtual network. But generally, this is the more secure way to go about it. And if you don't have a reason for your storage account to be publicly accessible over the internet, then you might want to go this route. All right, so we'll see. That's the last screen. We could have set up the tags like development environment, etc. But we won't at this time. So I can just hit create, and this will create me a brand new storage account. And we're going to pause that and come back when it's done. All right. I will say one thing. I do love this deployment overview being the new view. So when you create a VM, you create a storage account, it takes you to this sort of status screen. That's great, Microsoft. So let's go and create our secure storage account. We're going to go and do the virtual network endpoint configuration. Okay. So we've got our brand new storage account. It's hooked up to the resource group. If we go down into the firewalls and virtual networks in the settings table, you can see that we created this storage account with all networks. We're going to want to now add a virtual network. So I don't have any virtual networks on this account. So I'm going to say add virtual network. Okay. So AZ/SJD new VNet. Usual virtual network logic where you could create a address space. I'm going to put this in my 101 resource group. Same location, the South Central US. Default subnet. I don't really need a lot of address space, so I'm just going to restrict that. DDoS protection, basic storage, firewall disabled, and create. Okay, so that's going to create a VNet. Should be fairly quick. Now you'll see also on this screen, in terms of adding firewalls and virtual networks, it also has this concept of an IP firewall. And so we can add IP ranges to allow only whitelist IP addresses to access this. So this is a great new feature as well. So if I wanted to basically, instead of restricting it to a VNet, if I was to delete this, I could then also just restrict it to my personal IP address or to the IP address of my company, etc. Allow trusted Microsoft services to access this. So this is going to be your virtual machines that need to create log files and things like that. So basically you're allowing Microsoft's services to use your storage account. Allow read access to storage logging from any network and read access So this is if you are going to store stuff in the storage account for logging purposes, you're going to want to enable log analytics to get into the storage account. Okay, we're going to leave that turned off for now. So I've added my virtual network. I'm going to hit save. And now, even if I go, so let's go back to the overview screen. I go into my Blob account. Okay, if I was to create a new container, so this is like test. Then this storage account would basically, go into properties, this URL will not be accessible from the public internet because we just turned on VNet access, right? The firewall and virtual networks. It has to be a virtual network we just created and not from the public internet. So even if I had the keys, this URL would be no good to me. All right. So for the sake of the rest of this chapter, I'm going to actually remove the restriction. I'm going to say allow access from all networks and save that. That way we can access this now back again from our personal computers. Now let's talk about shared access signatures. This is another security feature. A shared, basically when you go into a storage account, the core way that you can access a storage account is through access keys. Now you can see here on screen, Microsoft gives me 2 access keys by default. Okay, so basically when I'm going to go into my Visual Studio.NET program, I'm going to grab this connection string. It has the account key embedded in the connection string. And anyone with this account key, even you watching this video, can have full owner permissions to the storage account. You can connect to it, put files in there. You can do a lot of stuff using the API with the my access key. Okay. Microsoft gives you 2. Now the purpose of giving you 2 is so that you can primarily use 1 if you do need to use security keys. And then let's say something happens and you want to change your security key. Well, as soon as you change your security key, all your existing applications will stop working. So what you want to do is switch your applications to the second key. And when that's all confirmed and everything's been tested, then you can regenerate your first key. So basically having 2 keys allows you to switch the keys without breaking your applications. Now again, you have to be very careful about disclosing this. You do not want, if you have many applications in your environment or partners, partner companies that need to store files, maybe you don't want to be giving away your access keys because changing them is such a hassle. And the amount of power that it gives them is total. So you cannot just restrict somebody to a single read activity. They would just have full access. So this is how you manage your access keys. You basically do one, do another. Let's regenerate this one. So the current key becomes immediately invalid. And so it's now regenerated a brand new key for me, and that other key is immediately invalid. Now, let's talk about shared access signatures as an alternative to giving away your access keys. So you're always going to have access keys, but instead of sharing them with people, why don't you try using a shared access signature? So shared access signatures allows you to be very specific with your security. So you can say, well, I only want this particular person or application to be able to write to the queue. So I'm going to remove blob file and table storage, and all they have is queue storage. And they can write to the queue, but they can't delete the queue. They can't do anything other than write to the queue. Okay, so you give them very specific permissions. You can say we want this to be a 1-year access or January 1st access, etc. You can specify the source IP addresses and or not. Specify HTTPS only. And you see here the key is that we're signing this with our access key. So the access key isn't going away, but what we're doing is we're using the key to create an access signature. So I'm going to say generate secure access signature. And now we can see that there's a brand new type of connection string that does not have our access key into it. We can also copy the URL. So this contains the SAS token, or we can use this full-on URL. So I'm going to say copy. Now, if we were to go over to a web browser, let's see how this reacts. All right, so I switched over to the web browser here. And you can see that I've pasted I'm going to zoom a little bit here, hopefully. You can see that I've pasted the URL of my queue into the browser address bar, and I ran a very simple query that basically says, get me the list of the queues. Now, this one just says resource not found. So because I don't have a secure access key or anything, it's just denying the existence of it, which is great behavior because you don't want people to know that the storage account exists if they don't pass the key. Now, if I was to go grab the key, I have to append the key, the secure access signature, to my URL. And you'll say now you're getting a different message saying the request is not authorized. We go back to the Azure portal, and you can see that I only have given this write permissions. I have not given it permissions to list the queues. So if I change this to say list permissions, regenerate the key, the secure access token, I'm going to recopy it, go up to my browser window, and repaste it. Now I have given myself the right permissions to be able to list the queues. I don't have any queues in this particular account, but this is a successful result, even though it's empty. So instead of handing out your access keys, you can generate secure access signatures. It has embedded dates and times in there. If that's something you want, you use your key to sign it. The other thing too is if I go back here and I regenerate my key again, this secure access signature is signed with the key. Okay, if I go back to secure access signature, it's signed with key number 1. And so therefore, because I changed my key, I'm now getting an authentication error. Okay, so it has the secure access signature, but now the signature is no longer valid because I reset the key. I would have to regenerate this secure access signature with the new key. And so that's another form of security, being able to invalidate your secure access signatures through by regenerating your key. So in this video, we're going to talk about Azure Storage Explorer. Now there's a few ways to get to this. One is you can see that right off the overview of my storage account, I can say open in Explorer. There's also Storage Explorer here. Finally, there is a Windows, macOS, and Linux software that you can download, different operating systems, different apps, to run it as a native app on your desktop to manage the files inside your storage account. So if we go into the web version, we can see here that it is basically showing me my storage account. And I can go into blobs, blob containers, and I can see that I just created this container. It's got no files in it. From the Storage Explorer, I can upload files, I can download files, right? I can make folders. Even though blobs don't have a proper folder structure, I can say test folder. It's a virtual folder. It does not actually exist. It's just built into the name of the blobs, right? We understand that the containers are very flat structures. There's a container name and then all the files inside of it. If you do want to do a folder, you basically have to give the folder a name, and then that becomes part of the blob's name. Now, in order to, so this is test folder. So let's upload a file into here. So I'm going to click the upload button. I'm going to choose a file. I'm going to choose my PNG file. And you'll see here that it's chosen to do it as a blob. It has various blob sizes. We don't really have to worry about this. Blobs are files such as images and videos that are just designed to be read as incomplete files. Page blobs are like virtual hard disks where you can access individual pages within the blob. You don't have to access the entire file in order to change it. You just access parts of the file. That's the big distinction. Append blobs are more like log files and things that you just need to append to, but you don't need dynamic access to other parts of it. So let's just upload it as a blob, leave the defaults. And it's going to try this 2 megabyte upload, check mark. Everything is existing. I can close this, and now I can see the file exists inside my storage account as a hot access. One cool thing about this web browser is I can right click on it and I can actually see that I can download it, I can copy it, paste it, change it from hot to cold, get a link to it that I can then share, etc. Okay, so let's copy this. I'm going to call it test folder. And if I right click and say paste, I've now copied a file from the parent directory to a child directory. So that's how you use Azure Storage Explorer. Again, we can do this on our desktop. We can do this within the browser. We can write applications, hopefully, to access our storage accounts. So we've been playing around with the storage account here, but we always have to keep in the back of our mind things like monitoring and logging and metrics and alerts. So right off the overview screen, there is some basic monitoring. So we can see storage account top level metrics for the day by default, and then it's going to have data in, data out. It's going to have the response time for queries and what types of requests are coming into the storage account. Now I just created this storage account, so all we have is what we've been playing with. We obviously could break this down into quick queue queries, which we certainly were playing with, blob account queries, which we were certainly playing with as well. Okay, so it's basic monitoring at that top level. What we really want to navigate towards is log analytics. Okay, so basically a lot of this monitoring has been lifted and put into log analytics. Let's go into all services, type the word log. We're going to go into log analytics. Now we have this log analytics workspace that we've previously created. If you haven't created it, now is a good time to create it. And if we go down and look at data sources, we can see that our Azure account, the pay-as-you-go subscription, my top level account, is already connected to this workspace. And so all activities from this should already be tracked. So I'm going to go back up. I'm going to go into the logs section. I'm going to actually make some more space on screen here. Go into the logs section. And we know that the Azure activities is going to be under Azure Activity table, if you will. If I run this, I can see that in the past 24 hours, there's been 77 activities against this account. What we might want to start doing is limiting this to certain things. So I can say where this tooltip pops up. I can say resource group equals, and we were operating on the AZ101 RG in my case. And now I can basically filter in those 77 activities down to only 55. Using the filters on the left, I can scroll down. I can see that create update storage account. Get the storage account keys. So every time I'm going to apply that. Every time using the Azure portal, I minimize that, yep, that I got the list of keys, it's being logged. And so if you need details on which user was getting your account keys, this would be like a tip for that. Maybe the account keys is not what we're looking for. I'm going to remove that, and we'll go back. Oh, you can't have any blank lines in here. Hit run again. The data comes back and the filters update. So now I can see other types of operations. So the creating of the storage account itself is listed here, and I can see that there's been 15 activities done on the storage account as we were playing around with it. Okay, I'm going to remove that. Hit run. And the regeneration that we did, so a couple of times we regenerated our account keys. So Log Analytics, because it's hooked up, got the workspace, all of my top level Azure activities have been recorded, and we can start to run queries to see what happened, who happened, why, if errors were happening. This is so far just informational information. Now, I will point out, you will see, let's open this back up, down into the data sources, you will see storage account as being one of the data sources. And you might be tempted to go, oh, I'm just going to add my storage account that I just created as a data source. The thing with this data source here is that it's looking for specific log files. In order for those log files to be any interesting to Log Analytics, we have to choose not just the storage account, but the data type. And so you'll see that Service Fabric events, IS logs, Linux events, Windows events, these things, it's going to look in your storage account for those contents. So if you're using your storage account as a destination for logs to be stored, then yeah, you could definitely set this up as a storage account logging event. But the top level Azure activity is what's going to monitor the comings and goings of access to that storage account. So if you do need to set up alerts, reports, etc., you're going to be based it off of the Azure activity, except if you've got accounts that are feeding logs into that storage account. Now, Azure gives us many different ways to give others access to the contents of our storage accounts. We've already seen that access keys is sort of the central element of a storage account. You do not want to be giving away these access keys to too many people, or really to anybody if you can avoid it. The shared access signature was one way that you can generate a token or a URL that you can grant to others that can have limited permissions that expire without having to touch your access keys. Microsoft also gives another method using role-based access controller RBAC. If we go under the storage account, under the access control tab, then we can see a familiar access control interface. This access control is on almost every resource within Azure. So we can go into here, we can click on role assignments, and we can see a list of applications and other services that have been given access to this account, and even other individuals that have been granted as guest access. If we click on Add and we click on Add Role Assignment, we'll be given up this tab where we get to choose an individual. So I'm going to choose this John Doe account, which doesn't currently have access to the storage account through RBAC at all. When we open the drop-down for the role, we can see the typical owner, contributor, reader roles, which can be granted to your entire subscription effectively. But if we scroll down a little bit, we can see a lot of storage-based access roles. So we've got the storage account contributor, the storage account key operator, blob-related roles, file-related roles, and queue-related roles. So let's say you want this John Doe to be able to basically read blob data. So you choose the storage blob data reader role, grant that to John Doe, and say save. Now, it does take about 5 minutes for this to propagate, but within about 5 minutes, any application or user that authenticates with Azure Active Directory as John Doe will have reader access to this storage account. So in this way, we're using role-based access control to control access to a storage account. Now we can see that this role has been granted for this resource only and not across the subscription. If we left this storage account, went to another storage account into access controls, we can scroll down and we will not see the John Doe account that has been granted access to that. So using this technique actually restricts their scope by only being scoped on this individual resource. So lastly, let's talk about replicating data. Now, when we set up this storage account, we briefly talked about the different replication options. Within the portal, we have the locally redundant storage, geo-redundant storage, and read access redundant storage. There is a thing called zone redundant storage that is accessible through PowerShell and CLI if we wanted to be sort of in between. Let's talk about what the scenarios are for locally redundant storage. So it's going to keep 3 copies of our data within the data center, basically backed up. Now, this is the cheapest storage. Microsoft is offering what's called 11 nines availability, durability. So that means that if you successfully write data to locally redundant storage, Microsoft's going to keep that data because they've got 2 additional copies. 99.999999999% of the time. That is basically a heck of a lot. Okay, so they're not going to lose your data if you successfully are able to write it. Now, the downside of having locally redundant storage is if the entire data center goes down, then you're going to not be able to get access to your data if by poor chance your data is stored in that data center. Now, to understand, when we have a region like we have US East region, I think this is stored in central, let's go back up here. This is stored in South Central US. South Central US is made up of multiple data centers. Okay, so if one single data center goes down and my data happens to be stored in it, then I'm not going to have access to that data until that data center is restored. Now, if I was able to select zone redundant storage, which I can do through PowerShell, then I would be protected against a single data center going down because then the data would be stored in other data centers. Okay, so out of my 3 copies of data, 2 of them would still be accessible if one data center goes down. So zone redundant storage protects you against a single building in a region having problems. When you upgrade to a geo-redundant storage, now you're getting outside of your region, right? So now your data is being stored in other places of the world. Now what you're protected against, if the entire South Central region goes down, then Microsoft will be able to pull your data from another region that it stores it in. Okay, so that is an additional level of protection in terms of being able to access your data. When you upgrade to geo-redundant storage, you're getting 16 nines durability. So that's an additional 5 nines over locally redundant storage, and which is an incredible amount of durability. Basically, you would have to store, let's briefly count here, 1 million, 1 billion, 1 trillion. You'd have to store 100 trillion items in order to lose one. That's a lot. Okay, so the more you go from locally redundant storage up to geo-redundant storage, the higher guarantee you have that Microsoft will never lose that file. And then the protection you have against the building going down or the zone going down, the region going down, etc. By choosing the read access one, then you are able to read from that other area. So with all the other replications, Microsoft takes care of it, Azure takes care of it. You don't have access to that data specifically. You read from your storage account, and Azure takes care of the accessibility. With read access, then you can access the secondary region for this. Okay? Again, same 16 nines availability. The only additional thing you get is the ability to read. So that's the concept of replication within your storage account. There is costs associated with this. So if I was to change this from locally redundant to geo-redundant, then basically Microsoft is going to start sending my files, and unfortunately I only have 2 of them, to other regions of the world, and I'm going to pay for the bandwidth of that, right? So geo-redundant storage is a little bit more expensive too. So there's additional costing implications, but it's not that much. So let's talk about failover for storage accounts. Now, Microsoft has introduced a preview feature that allows you to do failover on a globally redundant storage account. In this case, I've created a read access geo-redundant storage, RAGRS storage account. Now, if we go into the properties of this account, we can see that doing so with the read access element of it creates both primary and secondary endpoints. So the primary endpoint is for all the reading and writing and all of the things that you need to do on this storage account, whereas the secondary endpoint is only a read access endpoint. And so you can configure your application manually to use this endpoint for all your reads and writes, and if the reads start to fail, to use this endpoint for reads. Now, unfortunately, there's no backup for the writes. So what the failover allows you to do is if this region does go down, let's say I created this in the West US 2 region, and so if West US 2 does happen to have an outage, then we can initiate a failover and create the West Central US as the primary region. Now, unfortunately, this is a preview feature. And what that means is 2 things. One is it's not ready for production yet, so you're not supposed to use preview features in production. But the second thing is I'm not even able to show it to you because it's in private preview and you have to apply. Now, if we look at the documentation for this, then we can see that this is for the read access redundancy. And there is a risk of data loss. So when we go down to this diagram here, we can see with read access redundancy, you've got your 3 copies of your data in the primary region, and you've got 3 copies of your data in that secondary region. This happens to be West US 2 and West Central US in my case. And you've got synchronization, one-way synchronization going on. And it is asynchronous, which means at any moment there still might be some bytes or kilobytes of data that have not yet been synchronized. So if we get an outage situation where you're not able to read or write to an account and the whole region has gone down, that typically means the replication has stopped as well. And so there might very well be some difference between the secondary region and the primary region because the replication is not instantaneous. So in the preview feature, you can instantiate a failover, and that will turn your secondary region into the primary region. Now, it does not automatically create a secondary region, and it does not go back when the West US 2 comes back online. So once you initiate the failover, you're basically going to have to set this up again if you want to restore it. Okay? It moves to an LRS account once the failover has been completed. Now, the preview is only available in 8 regions, so 2 in Asia, 2 in Australia, 4 in the United States, and is intended for non-production use only. But the trick here is at the current time, you do have to register for the preview. It does take 5 to 7 days to get approval. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because this is a topic on the exam. And so you may be asked, not necessarily how to set it up, but there might be some situation where you would want to set up a redundancy or a failover for your storage account. And this is going to be the way to do it. Unfortunately, at the time of recording, it's not quite ready.